Get ready to hear some timeless historical radio broadcasts. Thank you for visiting Golden Age Radio. Listen to the complete NBC and CBS D-Day broadcasts on rebel.com/C/GAR. Support our veterans by visiting veteransradioministry.com. Let's honor their sacrifice. Thank you.
4:30 Eastern Wartime, your station, WEAF, New York. This is Don Hollenbeck in the NBC newsroom in New York. First, two late bulletins from London. The German High Command says tonight that great enemy formations appeared at the coast of northern France between Calais and Dunkirk this morning. The great struggle on the northern coast of France has begun. A Nazi broadcast quotes the High Command. If true, this is a threatened landing on a new point of the French coast. The German DNB news agency reports tonight that Marshal Karl von Rundstedt and Marshal Erwin Rommel, Nazi commanders in Western Europe, are on the spot of the developments. Reports on invasion are pouring in, mostly from the enemy in recent minutes, and the enemy is busy making admissions. Admissions that our troops are pouring ashore at many places along the Normandy coast. A German broadcast says Allied parachutists have now taken over an airfield in the Boulogne-Calais area along the Dover Strait. That, of course, would be in an entirely new section of the French coast, more than 50 miles up from the earlier announced invasion area, which stretches all the way from Le Havre to Cherbourg. This new German report places the Allies in action directly across the strait from the cliffs of Dover, which, if true, would mean that the invasion is spreading out over a wide area. This unconfirmed news from the enemy says our parachute troops not only have occupied an aerodrome in the Calais area, but they have gained what is termed a foothold in that general area. Shortly before this report, NBC monitors here heard Berlin radio tell of a fierce naval engagement between Calais and Dunkirk. The British radio says that the Allied invasion line in France is now sufficiently broad to amount to more than just a beachhead. Of course, we know that additional landings are on the schedule, and from the flow of statements from the Germans, these landings are being carried out. Vichy radio has been heard saying that 200 Allied ships had been sighted off the coast above Caen, there where more men naturally would be expected to go ashore to reinforce those already landed and pushing inland. Vichy radio admits that the Allied beachhead area has been considerably widened and that those fresh troops are leaving landing craft. Fierce fighting is taking place in the islands of Guernsey and Jersey, which lie west of the Norman Peninsula. This is another enemy report. Another German broadcast speaks of new Allied landings in the area of Carentan, just opposite the island of Jersey. I must point out here that all these reports are emanating from the Germans and, of course, must be regarded with great caution. From our own sources, the latest is more or less of a general nature. General Montgomery, commanding the armies invading France, who sent his men into battle with the message bespeaking great confidence and ending traditionally with the Montgomery send-off, good luck and good hunting. Montgomery says he's pleased with the initial phase of the operation. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King said after a conference with President Roosevelt that the invasion is doing all right so far. And here's another German report. Allied troops are said to have won full possession of the town of Honfleur at the mouth of the Seine River. Honfleur is just across the river mouth from Le Havre. The German propaganda agency, in a late summary, says that the Allied forces hold the coast for 15 miles between Villers and Trouville, which is to the south, across the Seine estuary from Le Havre. Prime Minister Churchill earlier told Commons that our soldiers have penetrated France in some cases several miles inland, and that the first phases have been thoroughly satisfactory with losses far less than was expected. The Prime Minister told us that our airborne landings, the landing of the troops who bore the first front of battle, was an outstanding feat on a scale far larger than anything there has been so far in the world. The German report on this is at least 4 divisions of American parachute and airborne troops alone had been landed on the Normandy Peninsula. These troops from the sky created a major diversion, many demolitions. War-painted American Indians were among the first of these paratroops to land in France this morning. These Indians are a troop picturesquely self-termed the Filthy 13. They're well-trained demolition engineers, packing 180 pounds of equipment on their lean, hard bodies. As you no doubt have noted, any newscast at this time is well sprinkled with bulletins. That's how fast things are developing, and here's another one. 15 Allied cruisers and 50 to 60 destroyers are reported by the Nazi DNB agency to be operating west of Le Havre tonight. That's another enemy report. Every plane taking the troops this morning through the purple, cloudy skies of the dawn was painted with broad zebra stripes, blue and white stripes, and the planes carried colored lights. All this was to prevent a repetition of that Sicilian episode in which a number of our own transports were accidentally shot down by their own ack-ack fire. That brightly lighted armada, traveling only a few hundred feet above ground, stretched out, we're told, for 200 miles. Immediately following this broadcast at 4:45, NBC will broadcast at dictation speed the text of the prayer which President Roosevelt has asked the nation to repeat with him at 10 p.m. Eastern Wartime. The prayer is about 500 words long. If you haven't been able to get the text of it, this will be a good opportunity for you to copy it down in time to repeat it with the President tonight. The prayer will be given at dictation speed, 4:45 Eastern Wartime, immediately following this broadcast. The invasion, incidentally, was scheduled for yesterday, but was delayed because of the weather. The invasion overshadowed developments on other war fronts, but activity continues on these fronts. Russian armies are understood to be massing for blows against the Germans from the east. In Italy, remnants of the German army are fleeing in disorders toward some new sort of defense line in the northern mountains. The Fifth Army is pouring after the enemy across the Tiber River in many places. Allied communiques say the battle to destroy the enemy continues without pause. And as a footnote to this assault from the west, the south, and soon from the east, Premier Pietro Badoglio announces in Naples that he has dissolved his Italian government, is forming a new administration in liberated Rome. One more bulletin from Washington this time. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson has just told newsmen that first reports of the Allied landings in France indicated the long-awaited invasion was going very nicely. And here's a story overheard by our NBC monitors. The Nazis are suppressing news of the progress of the invasion and withholding the facts from the German people. Radio Atlantic, the German secret transmitter, says in a broadcast monitored this afternoon by NBC. What scant news that is put out by the German home radio is very confused and depressing. The people of Berlin have gathered in the streets in whispering knots, wondering where the next blow will fall. They know that nightfall and the hours of darkness now ensuing will mean more landings. Their prime question is, where? The clandestine transmitter, located somewhere in Germany, often has accurate reports of what's going inside the country. It's significant, the anti-Nazi radio points out, that though broadcasts beamed to Germany from England repeat the German claims of successes in naval engagements in the Channel, the Reich home radio has made no such statements. In all the volumes of bulletins, communiques, announcements, and stories of the invasion today, one great factor hasn't been mentioned. It may be that it's too early to get any reports. That factor is the French underground, the silent, secret army of patriots that has dared so much awaiting this day and which should at this very moment have flamed into action all over France. For days now, General Eisenhower's headquarters has been broadcasting instructions to this underground army, orders as definite and as important as any issued to the Allied troops waiting in England. Just today, General de Gaulle sent them orders from London. He declared that the Allied landings opened France's battle for liberation. Our NBC monitors heard de Gaulle urging Frenchmen to carry on the war behind the enemy's lines, to coordinate their work closely with the frontal attacks by the main Allied armies. And here in the NBC newsroom a few moments ago, we just heard Radio Brazzaville, the Free French radio in the Congo, broadcasting that the people of France, following the instructions of the Allied High Command, are prepared to take up arms in back of the German lines as one man. Vive la liberté, long live the United Nations, said Brazzaville. And that's France's reply to the orders of the Allied commanders. So far as we can learn now, no French fighting divisions have yet got into action. It may be, too, that this hasn't been announced, but we may be sure that French troops will be in the van of the March on Paris. Just now, it's up to that hidden army in France to strike where and how it can at the enemy, to follow the orders of their leader de Gaulle and of the Supreme Commander Eisenhower. I know something about this French underground army. In Algiers last winter, I used to meet some of its members who were reporting there for instructions, leaving France at great risk, using false names, crossing the Mediterranean, or sneaking through Spain any way they could, getting their orders and then going back at even greater risk. My French has a good deal of Nebraska about it, but I was able to get the idea of what this underground army was doing, just how important it was to the Allied cause. And I learned enough to wonder sometimes if people at home appreciated that more, if even the Allied leaders appreciated what these underground patriots were up against. It's one thing to be a soldier with the dignity of a soldier and the assurance that goes with the proud wearing of the uniform, to carry weapons, to march and sail and fly under one's own flag proudly displayed. It's another thing to be a soldier in the dead of night, in the rags and tatters of a charcoal burner in the forest of Compiègne or on the docks of Marseille. He must move silently and swiftly. He must know how to dissemble. He must be able to keep his patriotism, his love of his country under control. He must pretend to bow to the enemy and to his own countrymen who have chosen to side with the enemy. These men we used to see in Algiers had drawn, tight, old looks about their faces. Even in that bit of liberated France, they were never quite sure whom they could trust, and they did well to be wary. For Algiers and Constantine and Tunis and the other cities of North Africa were full of the enemy. We switch you now to Washington for a special broadcast, the President's News Conference. Now to Washington.
Started there. On the air. This is Morgan Beatty in the White House in Washington. A few moments ago, the President held his first post-invasion press radio conference. President Roosevelt said that as of 12 o'clock today, American naval losses were 2 destroyers and 1 LST, that's landing ship tank. Losses relative to air landings were light, about 1%. He didn't say whether this meant personnel or ships involved. There were 181 reporters at the President's conference. Mr. Roosevelt said he felt the invasion was up to schedule. And, as Prime Minister Churchill would say, that is a mouthful. The President said that very few people here in Washington knew the timing of D-Day. You know, Mr. Roosevelt was alone among the high command, the only one that had stayed up most of last night to follow the voluminous reports of invasion. He studied each dispatch behind the White House blackout blinds. They were pulled down, apparently, to avoid even the rumors that a light in the White House at midnight last night might have started something. So when the chief executive faced the Washington press corps this afternoon, he was well abreast of the latest developments, but he gave us only an inkling of what these developments were, and anybody who asked any questions about them that he didn't think was proper, he promptly labeled improper. He said, however, that he was very happy, and all the anonymous and silent people around him, he meant the White House staff that he works with every day, were all smiles today. He said he had little war news, but it was all right to cover the part about the losses. He said, as a matter of fact, that we newsmen were getting things as fast as people in the White House. The invasion was definitely up to schedule. When he was asked about how closely held was the secret of invasion, he said he didn't know. He said many people here in Washington and elsewhere knew that we were sending large forces over to the other side, but you could almost number the people on your fingers of your hand who on this side knew exactly when the date was going to be. The President was asked about when this date was set. Well, did he know about it in advance? And he said that he knew that the date would be approximately in May or in early June. As a matter of fact, he added, I knew last night as the boats loaded and started to cross. The date was chosen very largely, according to the President, because of the roughness of the English Channel. The weather factor was very important. He said that we needed what seamen call small boat weather to get people on the beaches in small boats. And then he was asked again if that was a major factor on the choice of the date, and he said definitely it was. Then some of the reporters wanted to know whether the invasion across the Channel was timed to gear up with the fall of Rome. You know, Rome only fell yesterday. No, he said, because we didn't know when Rome would fall. But he did say that you can now see why we did not institute a second front when the politicians and others started clamoring for it. He said we started planning for this thing, producing the arms in December of 1941, and today's action, or last night's, was the culmination of all that planning. He said that, obviously, the last 6 months gave us a tremendous chance to bring in many more divisions and landing craft. He was asked about the parish radio, saying he was going to London the last of June, and he wanted to know if that was the summer or the spring. That was his way of evading an answer. And here's a very important point he made just before the closing. He said, the thing we should be warned against at this moment is overconfidence. It's dangerous to the war effort. He said the war isn't over by any means, and this operation itself isn't over by any means. This is Morgan Beatty. I'm returning you now to the newsroom in New York from the White House in Washington.
This is Don Hollenbeck in the NBC newsroom. A quick summary now of the events of the day. The Allied invasion is doing well. Secretary Stimson has just added his report to that news. Mostly German reports say that we've made new landings. Enemy is busy making admissions that our troops are pouring ashore at many places along the Normandy coast. The new German report places the Allies in action directly across the strait from the cliffs of Dover. That would mean the invasion is spreading out over a wide area. These are all enemy reports, unconfirmed by our sources, and should be taken with caution. Shortly before this report, we heard Berlin tell of a fierce naval engagement between Calais and Dunkirk. The British radio says the Allied invasion line is now sufficiently broad to amount to more than just a beachhead. Of course, we know that additional landings are on the schedule. From the flow of statements from the Germans, these landings are being carried out. This is Don Hollenbeck in the NBC newsroom, and that's all for now.
Also with us in the NBC newsroom is our good friend Don Goddard.
Ladies and gentlemen, at 10 o'clock Eastern Wartime tonight, President Roosevelt will go on the radio and will lead the nation in a prayer that he himself has composed in this poignant hour. The Chief Executive would like to have the people of the nation repeat with him the words of this supplication, whatever their creed, making with him a common prayer for a common cause. The National Broadcasting Company is presenting these words at this time, spoken at a speed that will enable you to set them down. After a 2-minute interlude of music, which will enable you to procure pencil and paper, I will read the President's prayer, the prayer of the President of the United States, the prayer for the cause and the armies of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, the prayer of the President of the United States. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness to their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard. The enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed. But we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. They will be sore tried by night and by day, without rest, till the victory is won. The darkness will be rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. These are men lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise, and tolerance and goodwill among all thy people. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. And for us at home, fathers, mothers, children, wives, sisters, and brothers of brave men overseas, whose thoughts and prayers are ever with them, help us, Almighty God, to rededicate ourselves in renewed faith in Thee in this hour of great sacrifice. Many people have urged that I call the nation into a single day of special prayer. But because the road is long and the desire is great, I ask that our people devote themselves in continuance of prayer. As we rise to each new day, and again, when each day is spent, let words of prayer be on our lips, invoking thy help to our efforts. Give us strength in our daily tasks, to redouble the contributions we make in the physical and material support of our armed forces. And let our hearts be stout to wait out the long travail, to bear sorrows that may come, to impart our courage unto our sons, wheresoever they may be. And, O Lord, give us faith. Give us faith in Thee, faith in our sons, faith in each other, faith in our united crusade. Let not the keenness of our spirit ever be dulled. Let not the impacts of temporary events, of temporal matters, of but fleeting moment, let not these deter us in our unconquerable purpose. With thy blessing, we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemies. Help us to conquer the apostles of greed and racial arrogances. Lead us to the saving of our country, and with our sister nations into a world unity that will spell sure peace, a peace invulnerable to the schemings of unworthy men, and a peace that will let all men live in freedom, reaping the just rewards of their honest toil. Thy will be done, Almighty God. Amen. That is the prayer in which the President of the United States has asked us to join him as he leads us at 10 o'clock this evening over the radio. And now a few news bulletins that have just come in. A bulletin from London. The Nazi-operated Vichy radio reported tonight that compact masses, that's in quotation marks, compact masses of Allied planes are bombing the Calais and Dunkirk regions of the French invasion coast. That's some 125 miles to the east of the landings made at Le Havre this morning. It means that our beachheads are expanding, that we are going to different portions of the coast. Dunkirk, of course, and Calais are nearest to the English coast. The German radio reports that Allied paratroopers have landed just across the channel from England, there in the Boulogne-Calais area, that those paratroopers have occupied an enemy airdrome there. If that is true, and there is no reason to believe the Germans would put out a false report of that nature, it means an Allied invasion thrust directly across the Strait of Dover, 100 miles or more above that Allied beachhead area on the Norman coast. We have no confirmation of any invasion activity in this area from Allied headquarters as yet. But already we are expanding our beachhead there in Normandy. And in Stockholm they're saying that Denmark has said today that German troops in the protectorate there have been ordered on an invasion alert since early this morning. And General Sir Bernard Montgomery says he is pleased with the initial phases of the invasion operations. General Montgomery heads the Allied armies taking part in the landings, as you know. Montgomery was quite happy as he told newsmen today that he'd given his officers a 5-point recipe for victory just before the invasion began. The 5-point recipe for victory, Montgomery said, was this: 1, Allied solidarity; 2, offensive eagerness; 3, enthusiasm; 4, confidence; and 5, all-out effort. That's General Montgomery's 5-point recipe for victory. And in Washington, Secretary of War Stimson, with smiles on his face, told the newsmen that first reports of the Allied landings in France indicated the long-awaited invasion was going very nicely. He's the second Washington official today to say that. Admiral King, Chief of our Navies, and a member of President Roosevelt's Strategic Board said that when he left the President this morning. And we learn now that the Nazis are suppressing news of the progress of the invasion and withholding the facts from the German people. Radio Atlantic, which is a German secret transmitter, charged in a broadcast monitored this afternoon by NBC that the German propaganda machine was letting only a trickle of news out to the German people. What scant news is put out by the German home radio is very confused and depressing, and the people of Berlin have gathered in the streets in whispering knots, wondering where the next blow will fall. They know that by nightfall and the hours of darkness now ensuing will mean more landings. Where, they ask. Their prime question is where. The clandestine transmitter, located somewhere in Germany, states all this today. It is significant, says this radio station, which is called Anti-Nazi, that though broadcasts beamed to Germany from England repeat the German claims of successes in naval engagements in the Channel, the Reich radio has made no such statements. It has not claimed that Allied ships were sunk in the Channel. The German radio people know only too well the deplorable state of their fleet. They recall the sober statement of a high Nazi naval official that they are up against the strongest fleets in the world. And in Washington, Henri Opinot, the delegate of the French Committee of National Liberation, says that French divisions soon will participate in the Battle of France and that French shock troops will help to open the road to Paris, the road from Le Havre, we suppose. Side by side with American and British divisions, French divisions armed with the magnificent material given to them by the United States soon will participate in the battle. French soldiers will fight tomorrow as they have fought in Africa and in Italy, where by the side of the Allies they opened the road to Rome. Tomorrow they will open the road to Paris. And Prime Minister Winston Churchill received today this congratulatory message from Premier Stalin of Russia of the Allied liberation of Rome. He said, "I congratulate you on the great victory of the Allied Anglo-American forces in the taking of Rome." This news has been greeted in the Soviet Union with great satisfaction. Those are the words of Premier Stalin. And the Berlin radio reports tonight that big air battles have developed over Romania today between Nazi fighters and bombers of the Allied Mediterranean Air Force. Soon we may expect the Russians to be on the push there. This news is brought to you from the NBC newsroom in New York by your commentator, Don Goddard.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
.05 Eastern Wartime, your station, WEAF, New York.
NBC again asks you to pause in prayer on this historic invasion day. Dr. Douglas Horton, Minister at Large of the Congregational Christian Churches, will lead us. Dr. Horton.
Let us pray. Almighty God, thou Lord of hosts, we humbly beseech thee for the men who on beach and in field, on the air and on the sea, now cast themselves into the battle for the liberation of the peoples of Europe and of all the world. Be to them, we humbly pray, a strong defense against the known and the unknown dangers of the onslaught, the soldiers' courage. Gird them with the armor of thine own Spirit. For those who suffer, we humbly pray that thou wilt be the good physician. Thou hast known the wounds of hand and of side. Sustain all those who are in pain, O Lord, as one who understands can sustain. We commend unto thee all those who will, for our sakes and freedom's sake, give up their lives. Grant to them the spirit of tranquility and trust. Give them to put their hope in thee. And having passed through the valley of the shadow in peace, we humbly pray that they may enter into the rest which thou hast promised. O God, thou art the protector of all nations. Into thy hands we commit the keeping of our own nation. We commend to thy fatherly care the President of the United States and all those in authority abroad, and give to us, O God, to do thy will as a nation. And this we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Horton. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard a brief prayer by Dr. Douglas Horton, Minister at Large of the Congregational Christian Churches.
The National Broadcasting Company regular programs, so that all day and all night you'll be able to hear the latest news of the invasion as it happens. We're standing by now in the NBC newsroom. Any moment we'll get the communique from General Eisenhower's Allied headquarters somewhere in England, and also we expect to hear soon from our reporters in Washington. So now, to continue our invasion program, we invite you to listen to the NBC Orchestra.
This is the NBC newsroom in New York, ladies and gentlemen. And now for a report on the President's press conference, we take you to Morgan Beatty, the NBC newsroom in Washington. This is Morgan Beatty in the NBC newsroom in Washington. I've just returned here from the White House down the street, and I must say it's pretty hot in Washington today, and I'm just a little bit sleepy. As a matter of fact, the President's last question at his press conference was, "Mr. President, how do you feel?" Of course, the President's hair was neatly brushed, obviously, in reception of the press today, but he said, "I'm pretty sleepy," because the President was the only man among the high command here in Washington who stayed up all last night to receive the reports as they came in from General Eisenhower's headquarters in London. And these reports obviously were very voluminous because of the detail the President was able to give us today. But first, let's review a few of the major points at his press conference and then go into detail. The President said that as of 12 o'clock today, his reports from General Eisenhower showed that American naval losses were 2 destroyers and 1 LST, that's landing ship tank, one of these medium tank landing ships. The losses relative to air landing, he said, were light, about 1% of the forces involved. The President was asked in this connection whether or not 1% meant 1% of the men involved or 1% of the aircraft, and he said he was sorry he couldn't go any further than that. As a matter of fact, there were quite a number of questions at the conference today. The President smilingly, he was in a very good humor, the President smilingly characterized as entirely improper, and he said that the men who were asking them knew they were improper. As a matter of fact, they didn't think about whether they were improper. They were so curious to get at some of the secrecy and the things that have had to be secret in the past that might now be told. The President said that this much could be said. He felt the invasion was up to schedule as of this point. And as Prime Minister Churchill would say, that is a mouthful. And of course it is. The fact that we have achieved a beachhead or several beachheads in France at a very relatively small cost is one of the most amazing developments of this very long and amazing war. The President said that very few people knew of the timing of D-Day. He said, of course, there are a lot of people knew that we had tremendous forces going over on the other side, but that you could almost number the people on your hand in this country that knew exactly when D-Day was coming. Mr. Roosevelt opened his conference this afternoon by saying that he was very happy at his conference today. He said he and the anonymous and silent people all around him, that is the White House staff, the men that helped him all the time, were all smiles. Then he said he had very little war news, but it was all right to cover the points that we've already given to you. Then one of the men asked the President how long he had known the date of invasion. And he was asked also whether or not it was geared to time up with the fall of Rome. The President said he had known the date of invasion, or the approximate date, that is, ever since the Tehran conference last December with Prime Minister Churchill and Joseph Stalin. And he said, no, the invasion of France was not timed to gear up with the fall of Rome for the simple reason that we didn't know when Rome would fall. Then Mr. Roosevelt took occasion to go back and review the long preparations for this landing in France. He wanted to impress on us newsmen, very evidently, so that we would relay it to you that you just can't have a war and a great fight at the drop of a hat. He recalled that old story, the speech of the politicians, that in the days gone by, millions of men would spring to arms overnight in defense of America. He indicated that he thought that was a very pretty speech, but a lot of people, or a few people at least, always ask the question after a speech like that, well, where are you going to get the arms for these men to spring to overnight? And he said you just can't do that sort of thing, especially in modern warfare. He said we started planning this thing, we in America and in Britain, and producing arms in December of 1940. He was referring to the joint war effort, of course, and particularly to the American effort. And he said that we have now selected the earliest possible date for the infliction of invasion on the enemy. He was asked then if the last 6 months had given us a chance to double the invasion force. The reporter that asked that apparently had been told or had the impression that we were given another 6 months on this thing because we could double our invasion force and be that much surer of victory. But the President wouldn't quite agree with that point of view. He said he wouldn't say that, but obviously the last 6 months did give us a chance to bring in many more divisions and landing craft particularly. He said that as long ago as Tehran, he knew that the date would be approximately in May or early June. He said, I knew last night as the boats loaded and started to cross. As a matter of fact, you know, the president stayed up in his study or in his room in the White House behind the blackouts. That was because, apparently, the White House didn't want anybody to get any suspicion or rumor started that there was a light up late in the White House in the president's rooms and probably something was up in connection with the war. So they had the blackout blinds drawn, and the president pored over the reports coming in from General Eisenhower and all the other commanders and possibly from Prime Minister Churchill there in his White House room. He did that, and he worked also on the prayer that he's been composing for several days, a prayer that he will give to the people himself, read to the people of the nation himself at 10 p.m. tonight. But to get back to that date, he said the date was chosen very largely because of the roughness of the English Channel early in the year. He said that we needed small boat weather. That's what seamen call weather good enough for very small craft to beach in. He said we needed small boat weather to get people on the beaches across the channel. Then he was asked again, just to be sure on this point, whether weather was the major factor in the choice of the date for invasion, and he said definitely yes. The president had one point he wanted to make to us toward the end of his conference. It was this. He warned us against overconfidence. He said that overconfidence was dangerous to the war effort. Then he told the story about a man he knew. You know, the president's fond of telling stories about men he knew, and some of the men think sometimes these men he knew at various times might be characters, montage, people sort of drawn out of his imagination, but nevertheless people who are very real somewhere. Anyway, he said something about a man he knew that came back from Italy or Sicily after the operations there with the impression that the war was all over. He said this man just threw up a good job and a very necessary job because he thought the war was all over and no further effort was necessary. Now, of course, you and I and lots of other people know people who did that very thing. I mean, the war charts, the charts on production in this country show very clearly that every time the Allies have a victory, a great number of people do quit their jobs. This operation itself, meaning the invasion across the Channel, this operation itself isn't over by any means. He says you just don't land and walk on through to Berlin at a moment's notice. And then was when the last question came in the conference, and how do you feel, Mr. President? All right, he said, but I'm a little bit sleepy. Mr. President, so am I. This is Morgan Beatty in Washington, returning you to New York.
This is the NBC Newsroom in New York. And for a continuation of our invasion coverage, we take you now to Louis Lochner at NBC in Hollywood.
From NBC's Hollywood Newsroom, here is Louis Lochner, Pulitzer Prize-winning European correspondent who knows more about Germans and Germany than any other American.
Good afternoon. From Germany has come an item of news which, if borne out by subsequent developments, may have far greater significance than first meets the eye. It was reported last night that the great intuition corporal, Adolf Hitler himself, had moved his Führerhauptquartier, in other words, his GHQ, to Western Europe and had taken personal charge of the defense of the continent against the United Nations invasion. Of late, Adolf Hitler seemed to have been superseded by the old-line General Staff. More than that, Field Marshal General von Rundstedt, a holdover from the Imperial General Staff of World War I, was reported as placed ahead of the typical Nazi generals, especially Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, and was placed in supreme charge of the invasion area. If now Adolf Hitler has been put ahead of von Rundstedt, I cannot escape the conclusion that this is evidence that the General Staff, now as in 1918, sees far earlier than do the political leaders that the war is lost. Let me reveal a story today that, as far as I know, has not been told in this country. It is vouched for by one of my best and most trusted friends. This friend of mine knew well a former lady-in-waiting to the late German Empress Victoria Louisa, first wife of the deceased Kaiser Wilhelm II. Those of you whose memories go back far enough to recall some details of World War I will recall that during the first part of our struggle to make the world safe for democracy, the Kaiser was comparatively little heard of. At least, comparatively little as regards managing the war. Publicity was spotlighted upon Field Marshal von Hindenburg, and especially upon that supposed super genius of strategy, General Erich Ludendorff. It was Ludendorff here and Ludendorff there. And as a symbol of Germany's will to win, General von Hindenburg was made just as popular as the propaganda facilities of that period permitted. For instance, a huge wooden, super life-sized statue of Hindenburg was placed on a prominent square, and anybody who contributed, I believe it was 1 mark, toward the German war chest, was permitted to hammer 1 iron nail into the statue. It was not long before the enormous statue no longer seemed to be of wood, but of iron, and was therefore dubbed der Eiserne Hindenburg, the Iron Hindenburg. When things began to go very badly for the Imperial German Army, however, the announcement was made one day that the Kaiser had taken over supreme command. Now then, the interesting revelation that this lady-in-waiting made to my friend was that in the bosom of the family, where only a few members were present, the Kaiser said to his wife and to such of his children as may have been there, such as the princess, I am going to be the scapegoat in this war. The General Staff knows that the war is lost, and so it has decided that I must take the responsibility and head the armed forces. As sovereign of my people, I cannot shift responsibility. If a call of this kind comes to me, I must accept it. But I know that this is one way in which the General Staff wishes to escape the responsibility for defeat. Now, if these words are, as I take them to be, true, that the Kaiser said them on that evening, there are certain very interesting conclusions we can draw about the coming events in Germany. Even if at the present time the rumor should not prove correct that Hitler has taken supreme command, it will be interesting to watch and see when that moment arrives. And then you can be sure that the General Staff will try a repetition of what happened at the end of the last World War. Ludendorff was able to escape to Sweden. And just as soon as the young struggling republic got into difficulties and the Republican regime which followed the Imperial had to clean up a mess, General Ludendorff reappeared and became the backbone of the movement that finally built up Hitler and that is really responsible for bringing about the present war. So in conclusion, I would say, whether now or at a later time, Adolf Hitler assumes final responsibility, that is the moment when you can be sure that the General Staff knows the war is lost and is putting in a scapegoat.
You've been listening to Louis P. Lochner speaking from our newsroom in Hollywood. We return you now to NBC Newsroom in New York.
Back in the NBC Newsroom in New York, we now bring you some bulletins that have just been handed us here. London. 4 heavy bombers and 7 fighters were missing from 3 United States 8th Air Force heavy bomber missions against more than 100 targets in German coastal defenses today. This was announced tonight. A bulletin here from New York. The main transmitters of the Nazi DNB propaganda agency in Berlin went off the air for 48 minutes tonight without explanation, FCC monitors reported. The main transmitters of the Nazi DNB propaganda agency in Berlin went off the air for 48 minutes tonight without explanation. From Italy, this development. Crown Prince Umberto, newly designated Lieutenant General of Italy, today instructed Marshal Pietro Badoglio to form a new government to include the political leaders now in Rome. Badoglio received this commission after having tendered his pro forma resignation to Umberto. The government now in exercise will continue its functions in its present form until the new cabinet has been constituted. It is understood in Naples today that Badoglio and several ministers will go to Rome in the very near future in order to consult there with the erstwhile underground leaders, most of whom are unknown to the Italian public, regarding the formation of a new cabinet. And meanwhile, the official seat of the Italian government will remain at Salerno, inasmuch as the present military exigencies will not permit Rome to be placed under Italian jurisdiction. Badoglio sent messages of thanks for the liberation of Rome to Mr. Roosevelt, Mr. Churchill, and Mr. Stalin. He told Stalin that the Italian people know the heroic defenders of Stalingrad were present in spirit at the liberation of Rome. Keep tuned to this NBC station. At 5:30 Eastern Time in just a few minutes, NBC expects to bring you an important broadcast from London. Here are additional bulletins. More news of how Moscow and all Russia reacted to the news of a Western front. Word spread through Russia like a wind-whipped fire today that Anglo-American armies had landed in France, and the people exploded with a spontaneous joy seldom even accorded their own great victories. The news came as Soviet armies themselves were poised to strike along a 2,000-mile front in fulfillment of the combined offensive from east, west, and south, worked out at the Tehran Conference. Instantly, the Soviets voiced a conviction that their Western allies would smash the Germans in record time. The swift capture of Rome convinced people here that the Allied armies carry a terrific punch. They expressed also a hope that the war will now be ended quickly. American correspondents were the first to announce the news to the Russians. It was not until later, at 1:45 p.m., that the Moscow radio quoted the #1 Allied communique. Another bulletin just in. Tokyo held an emergency air raid drill today. The Japanese official news agency declared. Tokyo held an emergency air raid drill today. The explanation of the enemy action, usually taken only when Allied bombers are on the way, came later. And here's some late news on relief supplies for United States prisoners in Japan. The Soviet government has agreed to permit a Japanese ship to enter a specified Russian port near Vladivostok to pick up relief supplies for American prisoners in the Orient. In making this announcement today, the State Department at Washington says that stocks of supplies sent to Russia last year have been awaiting transportation. And another bulletin, Calcutta. Strong formations of Allied heavy bombers have given the Thailand capital of Bangkok its heaviest pounding of the war yesterday. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
WEAF, New York.
Just one moment, please, ladies and gentlemen. Stand by. We're expecting another special bulletin or a special broadcast in just a moment. We've just been advised to stand by for a broadcast from London that is apt to occur at most any moment. In the meantime, here in the NBC newsroom in New York, additional bulletins. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, June 6th. The American 9th Air Force flew more than 2,500 individual missions before 1 p.m. today. This was in the most violent 12 hours of aerial warfare in history, official spokesman announced tonight. And here's how the Moscow home radio broadcast the invasion news. British, American, and Canadian troops have landed this morning in France.
The liberating forces are advancing, and no obstacle can halt them. The task before us is not easy. And no, the operation of transporting large armies over a changeable sea and their landing on a coast guarded by the enemy are the most complicated of all tasks known to military science. At the present time, our men are landing on a coast along which the enemy has created the most powerful defense zone that he could construct during 4 years of occupation. Our troops are already being subjected to counterattacks by specially trained enemy divisions that he has concentrated against us in France. This has been a day of momentous news, and not the least of the spectacular reports we have broadcast from here, the NBC newsroom in New York, was the eyewitness account of our Stanley Richardson, the first reporter to bring back a first-hand report from one of the naval ships which took part in the invasion. His report was first broadcast early this morning. Now, for the benefit of NBC's listeners, we bring you a transcription of this historic broadcast by Stanley Richardson.
People of Western Europe, a landing was made this morning on the coast of France by troops of the Allied Expeditionary Force. This landing is part of the concerted United Nations plan for the liberation of Europe, made in conjunction with our great Russian allies. I have this message for all of you. Although the initial assault may not have been made in your own country, the hour of your liberation is approaching. All patriots, men and women, young and old, have a part to play in the achievement of final victory. To members of resistance movements, whether led by nationals or by outside leaders, I say, follow the instructions you have received. To patriots who are not members of organized resistance groups, I'll say, continue your passive resistance, but do not needlessly endanger your lives. Wait until I give you the signal to rise and strike the enemy. The day will come when I shall need your united strength. Until that day, I call on you for the hard task of discipline and restraint. Citizens of France, I am proud to have again under my command the gallant forces of France. Fighting beside their allies, they will play a worthy part in the liberation of their homeland. Because the initial landing has been made on the soil of your country, I repeat to you with even greater emphasis my message to the peoples of other occupied countries in Western Europe. Follow the instructions of your leaders. A premature uprising of all Frenchmen may prevent you from being of maximum help to your countries in the critical hour. Be patient. Prepare. As Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, there is imposed on me the duty and responsibility of taking all measures necessary to the prosecution of the war. Prompt and willing obedience to the orders that I shall issue is essential. An effective civil administration of France must be provided by Frenchmen. All persons must continue in their present duties unless otherwise instructed. Those who have made common cause with the enemy and so betrayed their country will be removed. When France is liberated from her oppressors, you yourselves will choose your representatives and the government under which you wish to live. In the course of this campaign for the final defeat of the enemy, you may sustain further loss and damage. Tragic though they may be, they are part of the price of victory. I assure you that I shall do all in my power to mitigate your hardships. I know that I can count on your steadfastness now, no less than in the past. For the heroic deeds of Frenchmen who have continued the struggle against the Nazis and their vicious satellites in France and throughout the French Empire have been an example and an inspiration to all of us. This landing is but the opening phase of the campaign in Western Europe. Great battles lie ahead. I call upon all who love freedom to stand with us now. Keep your faith staunch. Our arms are resolute. Together we shall achieve victory.
You have just heard the Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
It has just been announced that General de Gaulle has arrived in England. He will broadcast a message to the people of France later in the day.
Back in the NBC newsroom in New York, and ladies and gentlemen, as we announced an error, that it was NBC's Stanley Richardson who was about to broadcast to you. Of course, as you know, it was General Eisenhower's historic message to the peoples of occupied Europe. Stanley Richardson is a good man, too. Great credit to Richardson and his staff for helping us out in these moments. And now here in the newsroom beside me at the microphone is NBC's Elmer Peterson, who will take over for a moment.
We're waiting now, and we should receive it very shortly, for another communique from Allied headquarters somewhere in England. These communiques, these official communiques, as you know, are worded very carefully. And so far, you will have noted, there has been great caution in the wording of these communiques by the Allied leaders. Every effort is made to be sure that the communiques are exact, that the communiques avoid any over-optimism. And so far, there has been, in our own communiques, there has been nothing of the detail that we have received from sources in Germany and in neutral countries. Allied headquarters in Britain at this time, of course, is a very busy organization. It's composed of staff officers. Somewhere General Eisenhower is watching every development. Somewhere he's in constant touch with those exciting developments across the English Channel. And from these reports, brought back in every conceivable manner, brought back by plane, by courier, brought back by shortwave, the actual wording of the communique is evolved. This communique, which we should receive very shortly, should, of course, give us a better idea of just how far we have advanced. It should give us a better idea of how much progress we have made, and it certainly will give us something to use in balancing the Allied version of the fighting against the version we are receiving from Germany. For this must be remembered. The Germans have a certain propaganda value in the reports they're putting out about the fighting. Fundamentally, the Germans are sitting back, in a certain respect, waiting to see just what the invasion is going to develop into. They have to watch to see just where the main thrust is going to come. Because, fundamentally, they must attack hard at the point where the pressure is going to be greatest. And so far, there has been no indication that this landing on the Normandy coast is the main thrust. We may develop another offensive far larger. We may develop other diversionary offensives. Here we're getting a test of what Churchill once promised us, namely that we must expect feints and false thrusts and rehearsals. So the Germans in their communiques, in their pronouncements, are trying to create the impression, of course, that fundamentally the Allies are advancing here and there. They're trying to create a certain impression which the Allied communique, shortly to be received, is going to correct. It's important that we should watch these Allied communiques and take them literally. It's important that when it comes to a final judgment of what's going on, we should base our impressions on the official Allied communiques as received, and if we pay attention to the reports from neutral countries and from Germany, they must always be accepted with a certain amount of caution. And here's some news just arrived from London. It's probable that Prime Minister Churchill will give an almost day-to-day account in the House of Commons on the fortunes of the Western Front following his 2 appearances today. We've always known that Prime Minister Churchill likes playing reporter. He's always enjoyed a certain dramatic touch about his announcements. And certainly the British Prime Minister must like his present role of informing the world in the House of Commons on day-to-day developments. The Berlin radio has reported tonight that big air battles have developed over Romania today between Nazi fighters and bombers of the Allied Mediterranean Air Force. It's a significant report because, after all, we're still waiting to see what the Red Armies intend to do. Those Red Armies have been preparing for many months, for many weeks now. The Germans have been counterattacking north of Iasi in Romania, obviously because they expect an offensive in that direction. And then we've had the report of the new shuttle bombing program using airfields in Russia. Altogether, it indicates that some action can be expected from Russia very shortly. And the speculation in London is that within 24 to 48 hours, and certainly before this week is over, the Red Army will be taking its full share of the final attack. And here's the late news from the Russian war front. Large forces of German infantry and tanks today again launched a series of futile counterattacks against Russian troops north and northwest of this Romanian rail hub of Iasi. All the assaults were beaten back, the Red Army High Command announced, with the Nazis losing at least 49 tanks and 42 planes. And while we're watching developments in France and in the southeast Europe, it's also well to keep an eye on North Europe. We have the Nazis encircled now on three sides, but there's still a fourth side. And the Nazis have been feeling out in this direction. They've been making predictions that the Russians may even go so far as to attack across North Finland into North Norway. And this is not without likelihood. After all, the Arctic route has been cleared. Our convoys are now sailing directly to Murmansk without interference. We've demonstrated that we have a certain amount of air superiority over North Norway, over North Europe, and this may lead to developments which will eventually see Germany being attacked from all sides in Europe instead of only three sides. A late Berlin broadcast admits that a strong formation of glider-borne Allied paratroops have succeeded in gaining a foothold on both sides of the road from Carentan to Valognes, south of the great French port of Cherbourg. The broadcast said this force has received reinforcements during the morning and at noon. Already, the parachute troops of the Allies have made an impressive result, but we must expect them also, before the invasion is over, to penetrate deeper and deeper into Allied territory.
Thank you, Elmer Peterson. Ladies and gentlemen, we're still standing by for this Allied communique direct from London. In the meantime, continuing our invasion coverage, our invasion program, we invite you to listen to the NBC Orchestra.
have heard a musical interlude in our invasion program by the NBC Orchestra. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Every American within sound of my voice. And so all day today and throughout the night, the National Broadcasting Company will bring you the latest news bulletins as they come off the wire, plus frequent analyses of these bulletins by expert news commentators. These reports come to you as part of our special Invasion Day schedule. German broadcasts continue to tell of attacks along the beaches for 100 miles between the ports of Cherbourg and Le Havre, but they say that Hitler's mobile reserves are rushing to meet the attack. It must be admitted the Nazi-controlled Vichy radio says tonight that the Allied beachhead area has been considerably widened and that Allied reinforcements are pouring in. A Spanish dispatch says that across the Seine estuary from Le Havre, the Allies are fanning out from Honfleur toward 3 inland towns from 10 to 15 miles distant. And here's a report from New York. RAF pilots coming back from bombings along the French coast today have added to our military intelligence. The airmen saw Allied tanks moving up to Caen, that's C-A-E-N, but as they passed overhead, the British flyers saw no enemy infantry in that sector. The flyers also observed several fires which looked like gasoline dumps going off. This is a report from the London radio heard by our monitors here in New York. And I'll repeat the second communique, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. Allied forces have succeeded in their initial landings in France, and fighting continues. This has just been announced by this second Allied communique. Naval casualties are regarded as very light. And in this second communique on the invasion, SHAEF says that the Allied assault forces met little opposition in the Channel or in the air. That means the Luftwaffe is still lying low. 50 German planes with a total shot down today, as listed in earlier reports. America's heavyweight bombers have been carrying out repeated attacks at more than 100 targets along the French coast just recently. The Luftwaffe is still holding back as it did in the earlier hours, still holding back as it did against us in Italy. We can still take a terrific pounding there on the coast of France. I'll repeat another late report from the enemy. Berlin radio says that about 15 Allied cruisers, 50 to 60 destroyers are off Le Havre, guarding great numbers of landing craft, apparently waiting orders to hit the coast. And these numbers of craft explain apparently our very low naval losses announced today by President Roosevelt. 1 warship, 1 landing craft. Naval air losses less than 1%, the president said. German dispatches again say Adolf Hitler has assumed personal command of the Nazi forces resisting the invasion. Under Hitler there at the front are Field Marshals von Rundstedt and Rommel. These are the 2 anti-invasion generals reported to be right on the spot. And I'll continue now with the official text of communique number 2. Here's the official text of Allied Supreme Headquarters communique number 2. Shortly before midnight, June 5th, 1944, Allied night bombers opened the assault. They attacked in very great strength and continued until dawn. Between 6:30 and 7:30 a.m. this morning, 2 naval task forces commanded by Rear Admiral I.R. Philip Vian, flying his flag in HMS Scylla, and Rear Admiral Alan Goodrich Kirk, United States Navy, in the Augusta, launched their assault forces at enemy beaches. This is Don Hollenbeck in the NBC newsroom in New York, and that's all for now.
And now we continue our invasion program with Serenade to America.
Serenade to America.
Across the air, America, we send you a serenade. Milton Katims will conduct the orchestra and chorus. Winifred Height will be the soloist. And Nora Sterling will speak to you.
This is Nora Sterling. Today we're putting aside our usual Serenade to America program. Along with everybody else in America, our minds and hearts are full of only one thing, the tremendous news that came to us only a few hours ago. We're glad, of course, that the waiting is over, the action has started, and that, please God, the end is in sight. But we can't help thinking of all that has still to be gone through before that end is reached. Today is no time for wild rejoicing. I think today is a time for dedication and for very humble prayer. The deep and almost nameless emotions we all must be feeling now, we went instinctively back to the man who left us so much glorious church music. Though he lived 200 years ago, Johann Sebastian Bach has never been surpassed for inspiring and reverential music. They say there are no atheists in Foxhole. However many there may be along Main Street or Wall Street, the nearer to the battlefront, the less that's remembered. And however high stands this book or that book on the bestseller list, there's one to which everybody returns at such a time as this. It holds up a light in the face of every problem, doubt, dismay, even in the face of death. The psalmist said, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged, the mountains were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. Be still, and know that I am God. Just as there is one book to which we all return, so there's one prayer that covers all our needs. Here is Winifred Height to sing it for you.
Ah!
Now, here's the orchestra to play the Adagio Pathétique by the much-loved French composer, Godard. Winifred Height will sing now the restful and lovely Ave Maria by Bach-Gounod. The book of Isaiah is full of the most inspiring and majestic poetry. Thousands of years ago, this Old Testament prophet spoke lines that seem to have been written for this very time, this very day, when the forces of liberation are going out to meet the oppressors. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, Fear ye not, neither be afraid. Have not I told thee from that time, and have declared it? Ye are even my witnesses. I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut asunder the bands of iron. For I am the Lord, and there is none else. My glory will I not give to another. If I may, I'd like to voice out loud what I think must be in everyone's heart just now in some form or another. Dear God, today we pray for these few things most urgently. We ask protection for the men and women who are doing this job overseas, guidance for them. We ask that in each of them there may be some light of faith to give them courage when they need it most. And we ask that the eventual victory may come as quickly as possible, at as little cost as possible. For ourselves here at home, for whom they're fighting, I think we need to ask most simply that we be with it, that we match their courage with ours, their singleness of purpose. And please help us all everywhere to remember that when the victories come, even that is only a means toward an end, towards an enduring and universal peace, a peace not of apathy or fear, but of understanding and justice and mutual goodwill. Amen.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Good morning. This is Dwight Weist inviting you to listen during the next half hour to two outstanding radio programs, Valiant Lady and Light of the World. Valiant Lady. Joan Scott, the Valiant Lady, brought to you by Cheerios, a product of General Mills, creators of new foods and new ideas for a better world. Today, we are a nation united as perhaps we have never been united before. In the mind of every one of us, there are the same anxious thoughts. How is the fighting going? And what can I do to help? Compared with the sacrifices that the men of our invasion forces are making now, it doesn't seem very much for us to do to give money. And yet the outcome of the battle may be decided by the amount and kind of equipment with which our men are supplied. We can help today by buying more war bonds. War bonds to provide money for equipment that will continue to give our men the overwhelming superiority we want them to have on the invasion fronts. We can help this very minute by getting not just the bonds that we can well afford, but also those that we may have to pinch and scrimp to buy. And we can keep on buying war bonds with every penny we can spare, backing up our invasion armies until the victory is won. Valiant Lady. Only 2 hours after their return to America by Clipper, Joan Scott and her husband, Dr. Truman Scott, find themselves deep in difficulty, just when Joan had so hoped that their homecoming would be the start of a happy life in which Truman would forget the bitter disappointments which have dogged his past. And to make matters worse, Joan feels responsible for their present trouble, for it all stems from the bracelet, which has such sentimental value to her, and which she refused to sell when she had the chance in Algiers. But now, the magic time is spoiled. Even the exquisite setting of Clarissa Clark's New York Tower apartment, loaned to them for the occasion, can't bring back the spell. In desperation, Joan has rushed across the hall to appeal to her employer, T.R. Clark, the multimillionaire publisher, for help. Instead, she has met a friend of his, Major Colin Kirby, whose quiet air of strength and understanding is at once reassuring and disconcerting. As he faces her, he says,
I don't want you to think I'm trying to butt in on something that's none of my business. It's just that you look so utterly miserable, and I hoped I might be able to help you. After all, I am a good friend of T.R.'s, besides which I'm a lawyer. Trouble is my business.
Well, it's awfully kind of you, but I don't think I ought to impose on you. The whole thing is really my own fault. I just came over to see Mr. Clark on an impulse.
Look here now. It can't possibly help you to keep this thing bottled up. Why don't you just sit down and tell me briefly what the situation is? And I'll give you a very brief opinion. Is that fair enough?
It's more than fair. It's very generous.
It isn't hard to be generous to a beautiful woman. Come on, tell me all about it.
Well, we just got back on the Clipper.
Who is we?
Mr. Clark and my husband and I.
Oh, your husband. Well, that's only to be expected. Go on, please.
While we were in Algiers, my husband bought me a bracelet. He paid $15 for it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt sentimental about it. Too much so, I guess, in view of the present circumstances.
Can a person be too sentimental?
From the moment he bought the bracelet, we began to be plagued by it.
How do you mean?
Well, there was a woman living there in Algiers, married to a Swedish nobleman named Ansgard. She developed quite a fixation on my bracelet. I suppose I should have suspected something at the time. You see, she offered quite a large sum of money for it.
How large? You'll have to forgive my direct questions. It's a habit we lawyers have.
$1,000.
For a $15 bracelet?
Yes. Tubby, my husband, wanted me to sell it.
I should think so.
Oh, I should have listened to him. He's not a bit money conscious. It never made the slightest difference to him. He simply must have sensed that something was wrong. But I was stubborn. I didn't want to give up my bracelet. Well, what makes you laugh?
Do you always champion your husband like that?
What do you mean?
Nothing. Go on, please.
Well, anyhow, we returned home, and we were so happy to be here. Everything seemed so wonderful. Mr. Clark's sister even loaned us her apartment across the hall from here for a day or so.
Clarissa? Well, that's very magnanimous of the old girl.
Oh, it was grand of her. So generous and thoughtful. Well, my husband and I were having a wonderful dinner. Then we planned to walk in the park. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and
Don't tell me. Customs officers.
How did you know?
Must I tell you again? I'm a lawyer. What did they have to say?
They wanted the bracelet. I gave it to them, of course. Then they opened up a little secret compartment that I didn't even know existed. And a whole collection of diamonds spilled out.
Where is this bracelet now?
Well, they took it along. It seems that it's valued at $50,000. They said we owe $5,000 duty and $20,000 fine. Well, that's so entirely out of our realm that it's fantastic. And not only that, they said we might be subject to arrest for smuggling in stolen goods.
Yes, I don't wonder you're upset and nervous.
Major Kirby, we really didn't know anything about the value of that bracelet. My husband paid $15 for it. It was just a lead bracelet. But to me, it was sort of a symbol of our reunion, But that's quite another story. The question now is, how can we possibly convince the authorities that we had no intention of smuggling in any diamonds?
Well, I'll have to see what I can do. You know, there's always a way. Try not to worry too much.
Oh, I wish you'd say that to Tubby. He's fearfully upset.
Look, Mrs. Scott, suppose we go across the way and talk to your husband. I'd like to meet him, and he may be able to shed some light on the subject.
Oh, I wish you would. I'm sure he'd appreciate it if you really don't mind.
Of course not. Let's go right away. Here, let me open the door.
Thank you.
You've got to stop that trembling, you know. I'm not a doctor, but I know that much.
Here we are. I don't think the door is locked. Tubby?
Doesn't seem to be here.
He must be. He wouldn't have left at a time like this. We've got to find him.
Now, take it
Tubby?
easy.
Oh, Tubby.
Just a minute, Joan, darling. I'm glad you got back. I was just about to come and get you. It's your dad and my mother.
Where? You mean here?
No, on the telephone. Go in and say hello. They're so excited they can hardly talk.
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad I didn't miss them. Oh, how rude of me. Tubby, this is Major Kirby. He's a friend of Mr. Clark's. He's offered to try to help us about the bracelet. Major, you'll excuse me for a minute, won't you?
Why, of course. Run right along.
You don't know how anxious I am to talk to them. We put in the call as soon as we got here, but we didn't expect to hear so soon.
Well, Major, won't you sit down?
Thank you.
Good of you to be concerned with our personal troubles.
I wouldn't say it was much of an effort. Your wife's an extraordinarily attractive person. And, of course, being a friend of TR's.
I know. People are so often affected that way by my wife.
Well, that can't be so hard for you to understand. In a way, it's quite a compliment, isn't it?
I hadn't thought of it quite like that. Maybe it's because I like to believe a man should have something better to offer than his wife's reflected glory.
I understand you're just back from Algiers.
That's right.
It's good to be back, isn't it? I just got back myself.
That depends on what you're coming back to. For you, Major Kirby, I should think it'd be great.
Why for me any more than for you?
Please don't think I'm complaining or being cynical. Just trying to be realistic. For you, Major Colin Kirby, the man who has everything.
Oh, come now. That's putting it on a bit thick. Not quite everything.
Think I don't know? Even though I have been away for 2 years. I remember your name. I've seen your picture in the papers. You aren't exactly a non-entity, you know. Ask any mother with a marriageable daughter. She'll tell you about your wealth, your social position, and even your fame as a lawyer.
Now I know you're giving me a ride. And what about you?
That's just it. What about me? Dr. Truman Scott, a young man of promise. That was some years ago. Whatever became of him? He failed, Major, right along the line. What do you think of that? He likes to blame it on bad luck, on unrelenting fate. Actually, you can chalk it up to bungling. Not much of a picture, is it?
Oh, I don't know. From the way you tell it, at least you sound consistent and certainly haven't lost your sense of humor. And certainly you have one thing to be very grateful for.
Well, what's that?
A wife who worships the ground you walk on.
Joan, that's what's got me nearly crazy with worry over this mess. You see, I expect to be in the Army in a few days, providing this can be cleared up.
Yes, well, I'll do everything I can. I promise you that. I know what it means to you. You see, my position is just the reverse.
Oh, what do you mean?
I expect to be retired from the Army. A matter of a wound I collected in the Pacific.
And as these two men face each other, the one so calm, so assured, the other so turbulent, so restless, we wonder how fate has designed their future destinies. Is this a chance encounter? Will they be friends? And what part will be played in the pattern by Joan Scott, Valiant Lady? In this time of deep national anxiety, there is one thing we can all do to help our men who are fighting now on the invasion fronts. We can buy more war bonds. Money we spend for war bonds will help to give our men the assurance that we're standing back of them in every way we can. And we ourselves will have the comfort of knowing that our money will give our men the vast superiority in arms and equipment that we all want them to have. A superiority that may save their lives and help to hasten the end of the war. Until the fighting is over and the war is won, buy more war bonds. don't miss tomorrow's story of Valiant Lady, presented by Cheerios. This is Dwight Weiss saying goodbye until then, and inviting you to listen to Light of the World, which follows immediately.
Bring you this late dispatch from CBS News headquarters in New York. President Roosevelt will go on the air at 10 o'clock tonight, Eastern Wartime, with the hope that the nation will join him in a prayer which he has written for the occasion. Columbia will bring you the president's broadcast at 10 o'clock this evening, Eastern Wartime. Before that, at 3 p.m. Eastern Wartime, we hope to bring you a broadcast by King George VI of Great Britain. This dispatch has come to you from CBS World News. We resume our scheduled programs.
The light of the world, the story of the Bible, an eternal beacon lighting man's way through the darkness of time. Brought to you by General Mills. You know, now that the invasion is actually underway, I don't believe there's one of us who doesn't feel a deep personal obligation to every man on the invasion front. We all feel that nothing is too much for us to do to back up our men, that nothing we could do could even compare with what they're doing for us. Well, there are many things we can do, but one thing we must do right away is put every dollar we don't absolutely have to use for food and rent and doctor's bills into war bonds. Yes, we must give our men our all-out financial support right away. For the greater the battle, the greater their need of our money for equipment. And right now, they're engaged in the greatest battle in our history. The greatest battle in the history of the world, actually. Yes, whatever we do, we must all dig deep into our pockets and our savings accounts and put every dollar we can possibly spare into war bonds right away. It's now or never. We all realize that. It's get behind our fighting men now with everything we've got, or let them down when they need us most. And there's not one of us who could bear to do that.
On this critical day in our history, our thoughts are with our valiant men who stormed the fortress of Europe, and our hearts are united in a single prayer, the prayer that God will watch over the men we love, granting the victory for which they fight and the lasting peace which victory will bring. In the belief that the lessons on the pages of the Holy Bible will bring comfort and inspiration during this time of conflict and of crisis, we put aside today our story of Jezebel's daughter Athaliah to recall some of the immortal stories of man's faith in God and of God's mercy and goodness. We ask you to turn back with us to the book of Genesis, chapter 22, verses 1, 2, and 3. And it came to pass that God said unto Abraham, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and took Isaac his son, and went into a place of which God had told him.
Father, may I help you?
It's all ready now, my son.
Oh, but you said you always sacrificed a lamb. Don't you want me to go down to the plains? I'm sure I could find a lamb down there, Father.
No, Isaac. Not today, my son.
I'm sorry, Father. I shouldn't be impatient. God will provide a lamb, won't he? I guess you'll scold me for not having faith.
No, Isaac, I'm not going to scold you today.
I was so pleased when you asked me to come here with you to worship, but I guess I've asked so many questions you'll never want to bring me again.
Isaac, my son, don't talk about the future. You've been a good boy. You've always been a comfort to me. I had hoped to see the day when you'd be married and have sons.
Father, you're so sad and different today. You speak as if you didn't think you'd live much longer.
Please, Isaac.
Oh, no, Father. I couldn't bear that. I don't want anything to happen to you, not ever.
It is not my time to go yet. I am sad today. I think God understands why and will forgive me. Now, my son, Isaac, will you pray to God?
What shall I say, Father?
Give thanks for his mercy and goodness to you and to all men. Tell him what is in your heart, my boy.
Dear God, I thank you for your kindness and mercy and goodness to me. And I want to thank you before all else for my father and mother. Please, God, take care of them.
Oh, merciful God, I hereby dedicate to you. I dedicate my only son.
Father.
Wait, my son, wait. Don't speak. I thank thee, O God. You have sent a ram into the wilderness for the sacrifice. It is not to be my son. Come, my son, let us kneel down here together before the altar and pray. For God is indeed merciful and good.
And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven, and he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. The story of the Bible is the story of the conflict between the forces of good and evil. Hitler is not the first pagan tyrant who has declared himself greater than God, commanding all men to serve him as slaves. At this time of invasion, when God-fearing men march resolutely against the forces of darkness, it is comforting to remember that evil has never triumphed, that might has never made right. 3,000 years ago, another pagan tyrant believed in his vanity that he and the people of his nation could be masters of the world. Meneptah, Pharaoh of Egypt, had enslaved thousands of God-fearing men and women. And as the Bible tells us in the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. The descendants of Jacob endured unspeakable suffering in Egypt, for a madman ruled, a madman who stirred his people to insatiable lust and violence by his words of hate.
I have a message today for all Egyptians. Our civilization is the greatest in the history of the world. Our public works will remain as lasting memorials of my genius and of this age in which we live. There is only one blot on our grandeur. It is these miserable foreigners among us. Egypt is a land for pure-blooded Egyptians only. These foreigners work as slaves building my temples and the Great Wall. They are beaten without mercy, and yet they still refuse to worship our gods. The gods of Egypt are the only gods in the world. It is a disgrace to every pure-blooded Egyptian that we cannot force these foreigners to worship our gods. And I say to you that they must be wiped off the face of the earth. They must be killed. I command you, my loyal Egyptians, to kill them without mercy. Those are my orders. Kill!
And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried. And their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land, unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. And in the land of Midian, Moses followed the sound, which he alone of all men on earth could hear. Lord God of Abraham, I know you are near me tonight, guiding my footsteps. I know that this mountain shall be called Horeb. It is the mountain of God. There is fire in the midst of the bush, and yet the bush is unharmed. Now Moses came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. The angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And when the Lord saw that, Moses turned aside to see. God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. I am here, O Lord God. I am here.
And the Lord said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. Armed with the miracle of his faith, Moses followed the command of God and returned to Egypt to free his people from the bondage of the Egyptians. It was not an easy task, but through the ages, the story of the Exodus has been an inspiration to the enslaved people of the world. There were dark years filled with suffering and hardships ahead of them, but the people who had followed Moses into the land of Canaan were courageous. And though many of them faltered, there was always a man whose faith was strong, a man who kept the flame of faith and courage and hope burning through the darkness of the centuries, until at last a great and free nation was built, a nation of God-fearing people ruled with justice and mercy by David, the shepherd king of Israel. Down through the ages, the Psalms of David had comforted and inspired all men and women in hours of trial and suffering. And today, as in other periods of the world's history, the words of the shepherd king return to us, the words of unwavering courage and undying faith.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
To each of us today, the words of the 23rd Psalm have a special meaning, a promise that the forces of evil will be crushed, a promise that the word freedom, which has nearly lost all meaning in these dark years of Nazi persecution, is alive and real again. Freedom lives today because soldiers of the United Nations, armed with powerful weapons, and with the knowledge that their cause is just, are marching surely and inevitably to victory. And as they advance on this first day of invasion, our prayers go with them. And out of the past comes the echo of David's unwavering faith in God.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Now, with the invasion so much on our minds, naturally we're all talking about it. It's the most important thing in our lives. But please, when we talk, let's remember this. Careless talk costs lives. Our enemy is clever. He hopes we aren't. He hopes we'll tell in a bus or a restaurant or to someone who'll repeat it some little piece of information he wants. He hopes we'll talk about our letters from men in the service and repeat what they said. And those of us who are in war work, yes, he hopes we'll let out some of the things we know about our work. Well, let's fool him, please. The enemy has big ears. He hopes we have big mouths. Let's show him he's wrong. Let's think before we speak. Let's remember that careless talk costs lives.
Of the world.
The day-to-day story of the Bible, currently the story of Jezebel's daughter Athaliah from the second book of Chronicles, will be continued tomorrow at this same time. This is Ted Campbell inviting you to be with us then.
This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Welcome, friends. You've come to The Open Door, and the makers of royal puddings and royal gelatins invite you to enter and meet Dean Hansen.
Come in. Come in. The door is open.
John Merrick, the huge, taciturn owner of the Jefferson Feed and Grain Store, has come to the open door. And today he says to Dean Hansen,
My mother's 55 and has her own home, and she can work at the books in my store as long as she wants. She's worked for security, and she's got it. And now she wants to throw it all away for the sake of the raggle-taggle gypsies, oh.
A new problem for busy Dean Hansen, a queer and unusual problem, begins today at the open door. Here comes Mary Woods of the Royal Kitchens with a paper bag. Something good for me, Miss Woods?
Something good, period, Arnold.
Oh,
I'm taking home some macaroons for dinner tonight.
I bet you're going to snuggle them up to royal pudding.
I'm going to put them right on royal pudding for a nice, crunchy taste that I know will make a hit. I hope all our listeners will try this easy dessert soon. First, make royal butterscotch pudding, just as the package says, and in that astonishingly quick way. When you're ready to serve it, crush a few macaroons and sprinkle them over the top. And not stingy, but not too thick. And that's all. Royal desserts, all 4 kinds, are awfully good just as is, but you'll like thinking up variations like this macaroon idea for royal butterscotch pudding. One thing I want you to insist on, though, is always getting royal pudding. There just isn't any substitute for it.
This is one of the fine afternoons in Jefferson that caused Corey Lohman, Dean Hansen's secretary, to look longingly out of a window at the green quadrangle. Even the buildings cannot crowd out the lush greenness. It's as if a green and friendly jungle had invaded the prim northern sanctuary of red brick. Soon the summer's sun will parch the grass. Soon the autumn will thin the now encroaching trees. But today the new growth is victorious. No one could be indifferent to the day's invitation. Least of all, young Corey Lohman.
Pull yourself out of this, my girl. No sense in mooning out of the window in broad daylight. It's just because these days you have nothing to do at night. No one to meet. No one to rush back for to residence hall and change. No one to hurry down for to the coffee shop and say, Darling, I'm not late, am I? At least not very late. For that, Corey Lohman, you can go down to Hostess House and put in an extra session washing the servicemen's dishes. Maybe tonight something exciting will happen. Maybe tonight you can lose your heart again. I wonder if there'll be a moon tonight.
The distant whir of the lawnmower comes through the window, together with the sweet smell of new-cut grass. Professor Greentree crosses the campus, shoulders stooped, a briefcase under one arm and several books under the other. Corey asks silently from her vantage point,
Isn't the day exciting to you?
Then Corey turns away and regards the dean's next visitor, Mr. John Merrick. Once more she asks silently,
Don't you find the day exciting?
And Mr. Merrick, summoned back from his innermost thoughts by her gaze, clears his throat.
I'm a busy man, Miss Lohman. I waited for the dean at his house, and he no sooner got there than he had to rush over here. We couldn't even talk on the way because some professor drove us over. Will he be much longer, you think?
I don't think so, Mr. Merrick. He's just signing some letters and some papers. Are you worrying about the feed store, Mr. Merrick?
Well, not exactly.
Oh. Isn't this a wonderful day? Don't you love the smell of new-mown hay?
I'm used to those sorts of smells.
Oh, yes, of course. But isn't it different when the sun is on it? When it's green?
Miss Lohman, it only makes me remember all the people who won't buy feed all summer because they got their own hay.
Oh. Well, doesn't it ever make you think of when you were younger and...
When I was younger, I was mowing that grass and trying to memorize my homework while I did it.
Oh. Didn't you ever have any fun, Mr. Merrick?
Couldn't afford it.
But there are so many pleasant things that you can't buy, so many things to do.
They all take time, and time's money.
Don't you ever regret some of the things you've missed?
Why should I? I never missed them. Got everything I want. House, a steady wife, and a youngster.
Is your wife happy, Mr. Merrick?
Of course she is. Why shouldn't she be? She's got a washing machine, a vacuum cleaner, and an electric egg beater. And don't laugh, Miss Loman.
No, I wasn't. I do know what those things mean.
No, I don't guess you can, unless you've seen a woman do all the things she has to do without them. Remember my mother staying up half the night to finish her housework and her baking after her day's work. Don't guess someone like you, Miss Loman, has any idea all the time these things save.
But what's the use of time if...
Corey stopped short, hopelessly. What she'd wanted to say was something expressive of the summer's day, of Dean Hansen and his grandson singing at the piano, of a memory of horseback riding with her lost lover, of all the moments which are useless and dear and happy. John Merrick looks at her politely, blankly, and then the dean comes out of his office, nods to Mr. Merrick, and the tall, sunburned man follows him back and closes the door with finality, as if he'd like to shut out forever all such whimsical notions.
Careful on my door, Mr. Merrick. It's not used to your strength.
Oh, excuse me, Dean Hansen. Sorry I couldn't talk to you at your house.
Yes, that was too bad. I know you are a busy man.
It's a nice place you got here.
I've thought so for many years.
Hey, you could have room for some chickens there. I could fix you up. You could put a shed where you had that old summer house. Say, you got your grandson staying with you, too, haven't you?
Yes, my daughter's son, Tommy Arnold.
Well, he could look after him. Good for a boy to have chores, or a girl, too. Might save you quite a bit of money. Might work up quite a little business on the side. Neighbors and students and all that.
It's very kind of you to have figured it all out, Mr. Merrick. Did you come up to the university from town to tell me this?
No, Dean Hansen.
What is troubling you, Mr. Merrick? Business all right?
Well, I can sell what I get. Trouble is, I can't get enough. It's not that.
Your wife?
No, Marge doesn't complain. Dean Hansen, you've helped so many people. Please help our family. It's my mother.
Mrs. Merrick?
I don't know what's got into her. Started in the spring. She's different. She got a permanent. She took a first aid course. She started going to music concerts.
Yes? Go on.
Dean Hansen, my mother and me always agreed on everything. We worked and planned together. I owe all my success to her, all my ambition, all my power to work. Why, one of my earliest memories of her is her ironing the boarder's linen while I studied my lessons. When I fell asleep, she'd wake me up. And if I saw her nodding, I'd wake her up. Yeah, she was strict, all right, and she was right. She'd take a stick to me if I didn't get up in the morning on time. Once I wanted to get in the band in high school, but she wouldn't let me. Said we had no time for such foolishness with my sister growing up and going to school here.
That's Rennie, isn't it? Yeah, she was graduated the same year as my daughter Lisa.
I didn't mind Rennie going to college. Mother always said a girl needed more education than a man to make the same sort of living. Mother was ambitious. Then. But now.
Now?
Finally, now she wants to get married.
But, Mr. Merrick, you'll pardon me if I say I find it a little strange that you should object to your mother marrying again. After all, she's a mature woman and should know her own mind.
Yeah, but she's 55 and has her own home. She can work at the books in our store as long as she wants. She's worked for security and she's got it, and now she wants to throw it all away for the sake of the raggle-taggle gypsies, oh.
The raggle-taggle gypsies, oh?
That's a song he sings.
But the dean is busy. You can't go in.
Excuse me, Dean Hansen.
Rennie.
How are you, Rennie?
Dean Hansen, John's been telling you about Mother.
Yes, my dear.
And who told you where to find me, Marge? Rennie, go home like a good girl, and I won't say anything about this.
Dean Hansen's going to hear our side, too.
Go home, Rennie.
Dean Hansen, this is my life, too, that John's trying to spoil. It's my happiness, mine and Mother's.
Rennie doesn't remember all we've been through, Dean Hansen, and now he wants to marry her for the money we saved.
It isn't money, Dean Hansen, really.
Mr. Merrick, whom does your mother want to marry?
The man she divorced.
John, how can you speak of him like that? He's your father. He's your father and mine.
Well, I can tell you all just this. If Mother marries him, I'll sell the feed store. I'll sell it at a loss rather than let him have the money. I'll never set eyes on either of you again.
Old childhood enmities, old hurts, stir themselves in the Dean's little office. Here is one of the most unusual problems ever to walk through the open door. The Dean looks at the large, sunburned man, then at his sister. They're turned away from each other. The Dean looks sadly out of the window toward the fine summer day. You know, that's true what Mary Wood said about keeping royal puddings on hand. An assortment of flavors. There's delicate royal vanilla pudding, rich royal chocolate, golden royal butterscotch, and the tapioca member, royal vanilla tapioca pudding. All so easy, all so good.
And while we're stocking the pantry shelf, Arnold, let's not forget royal gelatin desserts with their wonderful fruity flavors. They're different from all the others, and they're flavor sealed.
That's right. Royal puddings and royal gelatin desserts. That's the way to have better meals without fuss.
She chose between us once before. She put you and me on one side and him on the other and chose. Now she'll have to do that again.
John Merrick reminds his young sister how their mother once chose them and left his father. He's secure in his mind that she can be made to make the same decision a second time. Be sure to listen tomorrow to The Open Door. Your narrator for The Open Door, Arnold Moss.
At this season of the year, as the sun settles down to really serious business, we all have the same problem: how to cool off. Millions do it the gracious way with iced Tenderleaf brand tea in a tall, frosty glass. Frosty outside, delicious within. It's cooling delight, refreshing, relaxing, satisfying. But take the precaution to get Tenderleaf brand tea, because in iced tea season, flavor is what counts. It's more important than ever. The finer and richer your tea is to start with, the better your iced tea will be. So it stands to reason that a flavor favorite that makes superb hot tea will give you just what it takes to offset the melting ice. Yes, with a big margin of goodness to spare. Get a supply of Tenderleaf brand tea so there's no chance of running out. Have plenty of tea and plenty of flavor. Enjoy it often, with meals and between. Ask your grocer for delicious Tenderleaf brand tea.
This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Wonder Bread, the bread that's doubly fresh. Fresh when you buy it and fresh when you eat it, presents Bachelor's Children. Bachelor's Children, radio's most beloved cereal, is brought to you by the bakers of Wonder Bread and Hostess Cakes and is dedicated to the grocers of America. Some children don't seem to get ahead very fast. Sometimes they're tired for no other reason than that they don't get enough energy food. After all, a child burns up a lot of energy in school and out. If they could only get it like a car by stepping on the gas, there'd be no problem. But even at that, your child's body is like a motor. Only the energy comes from food instead of gasoline. And instead of a spark plug, the body uses vitamin B1 to help transform food into energy. So if your child needs more energy, maybe all he needs is to eat extra food with extra vitamin B1.
And that's just where energy-charged Wonder Bread comes in handy to give that extra energy. Because not only is Wonder Bread charged with energy, but it contains extra vitamin B1. Yes, Wonder Bread contains more than enough vitamin B1 to help properly transform it into energy. In fact, Wonder Bread is the only bread with the famous $1,000 vitamin B1 guarantee. And on top of that, Wonder Bread is doubly fresh. Fresh when you buy it and fresh when you eat it. Because slow-baked. That is, baked 13% longer than many ordinary kinds for lasting freshness. It tastes swell. Get energy-charged Wonder Bread today and serve extra slices for extra energy. Your family will love it. And now, Bachelor's Children, written by Bess Flynn. Clem Harvey was indignant and plainly disappointed when he left the Graham house a few moments ago. And as Dr. Graham watched him go down the street with the two boys trudging along beside him, he suddenly found himself feeling sorry for the man. Yes, sorry for him. And with a new respect for the kindness of heart that had prompted Clem to take over the responsibility for two children he had never seen until recently. And as he went back into the dining room to finish his neglected breakfast, Ruth Ann said,
You know, Bob, I felt awfully sorry for Clem when he went out of here just now.
Yes, so did I. Yet he had no reason to be angry with Michael for renting the place after he just walked off the way he did without letting anyone know where he was going or when he was coming back.
Wait, I'll pour you a hot cup of coffee.
Okay.
Your eggs are cold, too, aren't they? I'd better cook you some more.
No, thanks, Ruth Ann. I won't have time. I'll just drink a cup of coffee, and then I must get over to the hospital. Where'd Janet go?
Oh, the children woke up, and she's dressing them.
You know, Clem's just wasting his time going over there to see Michael about getting that place back.
You don't think Michael would be willing to let him have it?
Well, he can't. He's already leased the place to the Browns. He couldn't go back on that even if he'd want to.
No, I suppose not. Well, what do you suppose Clem will do in that case?
Well, there's nothing he can do, except find some other place to live. Clem's sort of a jack of all trades. He worked around here for me for a number of years off and on, between these trips he used to take.
Well, has he got money?
Only what he makes. Of course, he doesn't spend much, I guess. In fact, I think he told me some time ago that he'd saved up some money.
Dr. Bob?
Yes, Ella?
Do you know I could have sworn that I saw Clem Harvey going down the street a little bit ago?
And where have you been?
Oh, I went across the street to borrow some soap from Mary. I had to wash a blanket, and I didn't want to wait until the stores were open. And when I came out of the house over there, I saw this man going down the street, and his walk was just exactly like Clem's.
Oh, I imagine it was Clem.
Oh. Clem's gone out.
He's gone away, and he's come back home again.
What?
Yes, he was here a little while ago.
You don't tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but this man had two boys with him.
So did Clem.
Mm-hmm. Where'd he get them? Whose children are they?
His, so he tells us.
His? His children?
Yep.
Oh, my stars. Good grief, why, he isn't even married.
I'll be home for lunch at the usual time.
Now, Dr. Bob, wait a minute. I want to know what this is about Clem.
I have time. You'll have to get Ruth Ann, Sally Allen. I'm late now. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, my stars, I never heard. Oh, goodbye, Dr. Bob. Now, Ruth Ann, what is all this about Clem and those boys? When did he get here, and where'd he come from?
Well, we were just having breakfast when he came to the door with these two boys. He told Bob they're the children of a man he knew who's in the Army, so he brought the boys back with him.
Well, I never heard of such a thing. Haven't they got a mother?
Yes, but she's very sick and unable to take care of them.
Well, good grief. What's he going to do with them?
Well, that's just what we've been wondering. Of course, he counted on taking them to that little place of Michael's out in the country.
Oh, but he can't do that. The place is rented. The Browns have already moved in.
Yes, I know, Ellen. That's what Bob told him. He was terribly upset about it.
Well, I don't see why he should be. My stars, he just walked away from that place without saying by your leave or where he was going or when he was coming back or anything. Where's he going to now?
Over to see Michael, to see if he won't let him have the place back.
Well, I hope not. After I recommended the place to the Browns and they went to all the trouble and expense of moving out there, why, they'd just never forgive me if anything like that came up.
Well, now, don't worry about it. It won't.
How old are the boys?
Clem says they're almost 12 and 14.
Well, I vow, that isn't the craziest thing I ever heard of. Him taking two children.
Well, I suppose it wasn't a wise thing for him to do. But I think it shows he has a very good heart.
Yes, but that's the straight of it, which I doubt.
Why? Why do you doubt it, Ellen?
Because it sounds to me like it might be just another one of Clem's stories. You know how he always was, telling the biggest whoppers about himself and the things he did.
No, I didn't know that. But I'm sure he told the truth about this. Because when Janet and I were giving the boys something to eat, they told us practically the same thing.
What sort of children are they?
Oh, they're nice boys. They weren't here long.
Well, I give up trying to figure out what that man will do next. Have you all had your breakfast?
Yes, we're all finished.
All right, I might as well clear up the table now, I guess. Children still asleep?
No, Janet's upstairs getting them dressed. You go ahead if you're going to wash a blanket. I'll do up these dishes.
Oh, you don't need to. I might as well let them go now until we've fed the children.
Well, I'll clear the table.
I'll carry some of them out. My stars, I don't know what I'm going to do about that boy.
Who? What boy?
Dr. Bob. Why, he didn't so much as touch those eggs I cooked for him.
That was because Clem came in just when we started breakfast, and Bob stopped to talk to him. Then after Clem had gone, Bob didn't have time to wait while I cooked him some more.
Oh, I thought he just left them. He hasn't been eating right lately. It bothers me. Ruth Ann.
What is it, Ellen?
I don't suppose I've got any right to say this, and I know if Dr. Bob would hear about it, he'd say I should mind my own business.
Say what?
Well, I'd just like to know how long this business is going to go on.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm talking about the way you and Dr. Bob are living.
Oh.
It just isn't natural or right for married people to be living like they was acquaintances instead of man and wife.
But, Ellen, you don't understand.
Oh, I understand a lot more than you think I do. And I'll tell you this much, whether you like it or not. I should think instead of being so standoffish like you are, even though it's because you've lost your memory, that you'd be proud and happy to be the wife of a man like Dr. Bob.
Well, I am, but
He's a man any woman would be proud to call her husband. And I can tell you there's lots of women who'd like to have him.
Oh, I don't doubt that in the least. I suppose he had lots of girls before he married me, didn't he, Ellen?
Oh, the women were all after him. Why wouldn't they be? Fine, handsome man like him with a nice home and good practice.
I suppose before I lost my memory, I knew all about the girls he used to have. He must have told me about them. But now I can't remember any of that. Did he have many serious love affairs with girls?
Oh, 2 or 3. I don't think any of them got to the point where he got engaged, but there were a couple of times when the old doctor and I used to call his father the old doctor, when we thought he was really serious. But he ended up in breaking it off. And then, when I thought he was settling down to be a bachelor all his life, didn't you come along and he up and married you?
What were the names of some of the girls he went with?
Oh, my stars, I don't know as I can remember all of them. There was one. Certainly glad he didn't marry that one.
Why?
Oh, I don't know just what it was, but neither one of us, neither his father nor me, liked that girl. She was just kind of flip. Didn't seem like the sort who would make a good doctor's wife.
And you don't remember what her name was?
No, it might come to me later, but, oh, well, you know me. I just can't seem to remember names.
Ellen, was it Joan Gray?
Joan Gray? Joan Gray. I don't remember that name. Why? What made you ask that?
Oh, I happened to hear Sam say something about a girl Bob used to go with, and he said her name was Joan Gray.
Well, it might have been, but it doesn't. But now, come to think of it, that name does sound sort of familiar to me. I wondered if she could have been the one.
What one?
Oh, there was one girl. That was a good many years ago. Now, you know, that had just completely slipped my mind until now.
What had, Ellen?
About that girl. My, he certainly was crazy about her.
Was it Joan Gray? Was she the one?
I've sort of got the idea it was. Yes? Yes, I'm pretty sure that's the name.
Well, if he was so crazy about her, why didn't he marry her?
I don't just rightly know.
What was she like?
Oh, as I remember, she was a beautiful girl. Tall, queenly looking. They'd have made a handsome couple, the two of them. Isn't it funny the way men do? You're just the opposite of her. Well, like they say, caught on the rebound. Oh, good grief. Why, Ruth Ann, you're crying, child.
No, I'm not. I'm not crying at all. What have I got to cry about?
And saying this, Ruth Ann puts down the dishes she has in her hands and hastily leaves the room. Ellen stands for a minute, looking after her in a guilty sort of fashion, starts to call to Ruth Ann, but then changes her mind and goes on out to the kitchen. If you don't care how long bread stays fresh, you have no problem. But if you do, listen to this letter from Mrs. P.M. Bacon, 1511 Maiden Lane, Springfield, Ohio.
I pack a lunch for my husband and daughter. Several times they remarked that the bread in their sandwiches was very dry, although it was carefully wrapped in wax paper. One day I bought a loaf of Wonder Bread. I was very pleased to hear them both say, "What kind of bread did you put in my lunch today? It certainly tasted different, so nice and fresh. From now on, I'm buying Wonder Bread."
The bread you want is one that's fresh and stays fresh. That's energy-charged Wonder Bread, the doubly fresh bread. Fresh when you buy it and fresh when you eat it. For energy-charged Wonder Bread is low-baked. Baked 13% longer than many ordinary kinds for lasting freshness. Remember, energy-charged Wonder Bread can help you step up your energy. So eat extra Wonder Bread every day for extra energy. Remember, too, please, energy-charged Wonder Bread is the only bread sold under the famous $1,000 vitamin B1 guarantee. Yes, every loaf of energy-charged Wonder Bread contains more than enough vitamin B1 to help properly transform it into energy. So get energy-charged Wonder Bread doubly fresh from your grocer today. You'll be glad you did. Ellen has a most uncomfortable day, and this evening she decides to have a talk with Janet. Please try to hear Bachelor's Children tomorrow when this conversation takes place. Meanwhile, in the interests of your family's appetite and health, get new Wonder Bread made with vitamin B1, the bread that's doubly fresh. Fresh when you buy it and fresh when you eat it. If you take 1 quart out of a gallon, you have 3 quarts left. That's the story about black market gasoline. With only so much gasoline, ration coupons are issued in order to divide it fair and square. Stolen or counterfeit coupons for the black market trade take gasoline out of circulation. In fact, if there were no black market, A coupons would be good for about 25% more gasoline. Thus, you can see the wisdom of playing square with gasoline rationing. So make sure you turn coupons in for the gas you get. And be sure to write your license number and state on the face of all your coupons.
This program has come to you from our Chicago studios in the Wrigley Building. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.